Kulin Nation. As always, you can join us in the conversation and text us in the studio line. You can hit the contact us button at Radio Architecture. My guest and conversation partner this evening is Kerstin Thompson. She is the design director and leader on all projects undertaken by KTA, supported by a dedicated and skilled team. Her design excellence, project success, and strategic thinking has been recognised through a raft of architectural awards at state, national, and international levels. In recognition of her work and contribution to the profession and tertiary education, Kerstin was elevated to Life Fellow of the Australian Institute of Architects in 2017. In 2022, she was appointed member of the Order of Australia, and in 2023, she was awarded the Gold Medal and the Australian Institute of Architects' highest honour. Welcome to the program, Kerstin.
Hello, Ilana. What a pleasure to be here. And I'm back. My screen disappeared, but I'm here. I can see you. It's great.
You're here, and it's live radio. It's part of the fun, part of the joy.
No one cares what we can see, but yeah.
No one can see, but listeners can see that you are dialing in from another part of Melbourne. What Aboriginal country are you dialing in from tonight?
I'm on Wurrung country, so close to the city centre. Yeah, on the edge of what was an incredible rich food source and wetland a long time ago, and now it's pretty plastered with site works and contaminated soil and so on. It's near North Melbourne, so yeah, quite change.
We're here on the edge too of the ancient Karam swamp, and across the beautiful mighty Eastern Kulin Nation. It is such an honour for me to have you on the program. I've been a long fan and follower of your work, and I'm so interested in this conversation, and particularly actually the early moments and the early memories of your practice that perhaps many listeners might not be too far across. There is one question I love to ask all my guests.
Okay.
And that's, what's your earliest memory of a building or place?
Earliest memory of a building or place. Okay. Now, we all know that memories are tricky things and sometimes come from what people have told us or photographs we've seen. But I have a very strong memory of sitting under a tree and I think I'm like really little, like a year and a half or something. And I was sitting under a tree somewhere near Bacchus Marsh, which is where some of my dad's family came from. And I have a feeling there was mud on the ground. And I wonder if I've embellished this memory because my dad was notorious for running out of petrol or getting us bogged. So I wonder if it's an early memory of being bogged, and the best thing about it was being at least put under a tree while people dealt with that small problem. Yeah.
Do you think you were playing in that mud like toddlers do sometimes?
I don't know. It's as I say, it's just this vague hunch of tree and ground, being in the dirt somehow. So that's what I reckon is my first place memory. That's of an unarchitectural kind, but yeah.
Well, what came to me is that you're originally quite well known for your brickwork and brickwork on projects.
Yeah.
And you're still quite well known for your brickwork on projects.
Yeah.
And that association of brick and mud perhaps gives us a little.
That could well be it. Yeah, but no, that's true. I mean, as it turns out, you're right about the bricks and memories, and I think later memories around buildings that sort of get embedded in you often feature bricks or blockwork. And funnily enough, my mum's family came from brick makers in Central Europe. So, they made bricks for hundreds of years. So I think it's definitely in the blood.
It is
kind of intriguing to me. Yeah.
Wow.
And we did all bring bricks back from excavated ground from a family trip in 2001. We're all madly under grass trying to find these old bits of brick and things. So there is a bit of an heirloom as a chunk of brick. And trying to explain that to customs officials why a whole gaggle of people coming back to the country who've got bricks in their luggage is interesting. Yeah.
all the way from Europe.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, materials
Yeah.
carry memory, as we know.
They certainly do. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Very special, and bricks are phenomenal that way.
Why architecture? When did you first decide or consider the career option?
Mm, I think it was actually quite late. I can't say I wanted to be one from very early on. I mean, I recall interest in making spaces like kids do anyway. Who doesn't dream of uh, your own little worlds, whether it's under a table or in strange little spaces you either find or make. But when I was sort of towards ends of school years, I was covering all sorts of things I thought would be interesting to do. Things like, at one stage I was interested in theatre, and at another stage, fascinated by psychology and psychiatry. So that was a very serious option for a bit. And then I think I was told that I was not capable enough to go to uni, let alone study medicine. So, the psychiatry thing was seen as not going to go anywhere. Having said all of that, I think the interest in people that those early career possibilities indicate makes perfect sense why you'd end up in architecture, because if you don't understand people, I don't think you can really make very good buildings. But what else? So yes, it was pretty late, and then I sort of towards the end of school decided that I was interested in studying architecture, and it didn't. On reflection, it's not that surprising given what my mum and uncle used to do. I spent a bit of time on site because a lot of recent arrivals here. Houses and so on were one way of, if you were sort of relatively unskilled, of being able to make a place here. And so that was really intriguing to me, and how that came about. So I suspect it was a bit of that. And then watching my mum be very good at very speedily making home. We used to move quite a lot, and she would set up house overnight. It was incredible. And so there was something about how people make a home. It's really basic, and I have often thought about how whether it's a house, whether it's a school, whether it's your place of work, how you make people feel settled and comfortable with where they are in their daily life and the things they have to do all the time. That's, I think, part of that homemaking. So I don't just think it applies to house. It's how do you make people feel comfortable and able to do what they need to do. And so that's infinitely fascinating. And that's why I sort of am here doing what we're doing. So yeah, lots of influences, I'm sure. Yeah.
The next step to that comfort then becomes connection, right? And connection to place.
Right. Absolutely. That's right. And the people through place, our relationships happen in place, our relationships with each other, our relationships with the world around us, with our environment. And architecture or buildings are a wonderful means of providing the space for those, then the possibility for those things. But I do always remind myself that, you can make the most remarkable space in the world, but if there's no one feeling attached to it or feeling like it suits their purpose or their needs, then it's meaningless. And also that it's what people bring to a place, their lives, their people, their stuff. That's all what makes home in the world, and they're the most important things. So it's like a humility around architecture too. It can do a lot, but it's the main game is people and their lives within it. And we all know if you haven't got a home, but you've got your people, that's huge. Yeah, that's really life, isn't it? Yeah.
Absolutely. These are very nurturing, very connected, very empathetic ideas that ultimately underpin your practice and the work
Mm.
of Kerstin Thompson Architects. And I'm curious because you've always had this very strong craft base, very refined
Mm.
approach really from the very beginning of your practice. It's been very clear for
Mm.
you. But I understand you were educated at RMIT University,
Yeah.
my alma mater as well,
Yeah.
probably amongst
Yeah.
the height of postmodernism
Yes.
when not to say that it wasn't valued, but it was definitely the main approach, the flavor of the day,
Yeah.
was very different to your very strong vision.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Your ideas about architecture, when did they start
Mm.
emerging for you while you were a student?
Mm. Well, I mean, the thing that's really interesting about maybe a shared RMIT history is that, or experience anyway, is that when I started there, which was early 80s, it was 1983, what's really interesting to me is it was at the time when we were still getting a very strong impact of the social sciences on architecture. So it was quite a different school 5 years later. And we did things like, for instance, I remember sitting in Building 8 when it was the John Andrews building, not the Peter Corrigan, Edmund Corrigan one later. And I had to map on through drawing where people were sitting, where they were hanging out with their mates, where they were eating, where they were passing through, loitering, rushing, etc. And it was just this, I thought it was fascinating just how people use stuff. And, why would people be more likely to sit in that corner and not that one? What is it about that that makes that feel more cozy, more intimate, more accommodating, and why are they avoiding that bit over there? So it was quite a different school. It was a lot more about what people do with space and how they react to it. And I would say less about a kind of stylistic understanding or even about more, what things look like or so on. So it was very grounding in people's behaviour, actually. And I sometimes laugh because I think then you have more recent versions like some of what Atelier Barwell's done with their work and their mapping of people, and they do it in a fabulous drawing technique that is more of this time, but there is something about behaviour that is consistent across it. So yeah, so that was one thing. I think the other thing I'd say, a key takeaway for me from my RMIT training was just this celebration of like looking to our own places, our own situation as a source for architectural joy and opportunity. That while we might take lessons from other parts of the world and influences from elsewhere, we've also got a very particular set of circumstances about who we are as a city, as a suburb, as a group of people, a very diverse group of people. And so, how do we draw from that? How do we draw from our landscapes? How do we celebrate those? And the kind of fabulous mixture that we have here. So they were some of the early things. How do you act local in a discipline that, is all over the world? How do you do something right for here? How do you make a house that suits our purposes and so forth?
I love that 30, 40 years on, we are still grappling with those questions of what is Australian architecture and what Australian architecture should be. I almost say that we're living the question on
Yeah,
this moment.
absolutely.
What would
And
you...
actually, I was just thinking that one of the ways that's probably an easy way to explain how this plays out in the practice is we've done quite a lot of police stations over the years, and one of which is in Carrum Downs, so probably quite close to where you're sitting. And it was really, they've intrigued me as projects because we've done one in Carrum Downs, that was the biggest one, Marysville, Hurstbridge, and Warrandyte. And each time they have pretty much the same brief, the same set of spaces and requirements, but they're all in very different parts of Melbourne. And what I have really loved about those is that each station tells you something about that particular community. So there's not only not an Australian architecture, there's not really a Melbourne one, and it's just how far you want to go with making something local. And I love that possibility. How can you use a little building to reinforce something that the community values about a place? So, for instance, in Warrandyte, it's a green glazed brick little building that sits beautifully in that very green wedge landscape of excuse me, Warrandyte, right near the Yarra River. So little things like that are fascinating. And then meanwhile, Carram's on a highway and it's much more resilient, and so they've got different personalities.
I'm fascinated by the phenomena where the hyper-local becomes the national, just like in stories or anecdotes or in art, where something very, very personal, very private, very meaningful becomes universalized in a way. And of course, that becomes recognized in your work and your contribution to Australian architecture. So I know you just mentioned that in effect there might not be an Australian architecture because the focus is so local, but yet the outcome is such an Australian flavour. And I'm sure readers and listeners, should they pick up your monograph and flick through, it can definitely glean something that suggests an Australian architecture. So if pressed, how would you describe Australian architecture?
Oh my goodness. Okay. Now I'm going to get stuck in regional difference, aren't I? Because I often, every time I go up north, and I've been spending a bit of time up in Queensland doing some teaching up there, and I just get struck by how different things are there, and the possibilities are so different. For instance, the capacity of, say, architects up there and anyone making a house there to have those indoor-outdoor rooms that we all talk about down here, and we do to a point. But there are some times in the year where, we need our double-glazed windows because it's really, really cold, or it's really, really hot. And so that's a really obvious one, but it makes for a very different space and experience of home or environment. I think there is. I do think there is there's a sort of. Sometimes I think there's an awkwardness to what we have here that's almost celebrated, actually, and it communicates a degree of making do and a degree of not being too precious, which I find lack of preciousness quite appealing, actually, which strangely some people might think is counter to what we do, which, as you described, is carefully detailed and so on. I would say that we do that, I would hope, with the outcome that something is quite tough and resilient and is able to withstand the rough and tumble of life. So not precious for the sake of itself, if that makes sense.
I think some of that ruggedness comes through in your material choices and brickwork and blockwork
back
and
to
being
those
off
bricks,
the earth
isn't
and
it?
Australian landscape, Australian soil, maybe sort of rugged Australian character sometimes.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, a kind of a directness, I would say. I mean, certainly in our work, I appreciate things that are quite direct. That's not to say they can't be beautiful or joyful. But I would hope a kind of unfussiness, which is good. I think there's a strange mixture here of sort of pragmatism, and sometimes I think our job is how you meet pragmatism, because I think a lot of what we do is very much about finding something pragmatic, but then is still doing something beyond what might have been expected.
And exactly that elevation, that hope, that joy, that ambition.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right. So I don't know if that's answered something of that question.
No, it has. That was a beautiful response. Thank you. I do want to circle back to
Yeah.
the ambition of the student years.
Mm.
What was the biggest lesson you learned as a student that is still with you to this day?
I would say I really learnt my lesson about leaving something to the very last minute, and it failed miserably. So I used to think, before that disaster, I used to think that last minute pressure was fruitful more often than not. And, still we spend our life on deadline. It's just part of the industry. So I find it fascinating how time just keeps splitting when you're under deadline. You think, this is incredible. We're getting more and more done exponentially the closer to the deadline we get. But on that instance, it didn't actually work. It was just before my major project at RMIT, and so that's your final project. It's supposed to be, your 5 years worth of studies. And I think about 2 days out from the final presentation, I decided to completely change it and completely redo the presentation. It was just a disaster. So, of course, it meant I hadn't slept by the time I actually went to do the presentation. I was delirious. And I remember the lovely Jason Pickford, who was one of the lecturers there, who very kindly was trying to help me through my presentation by, reinforcing to me all the things he knew the project was trying to do, and I couldn't put two words together. And I didn't even realise how helpful he was being, so I didn't even take the opportunity that he was handing me to explain myself better. So it was a very good lesson in not sleeping the night before a major presentation, and knowing when major change is a good idea and maybe when it's not. So, timing.
Students take notes. Students and graduates
Yeah,
heed
that's right.
heed the lessons of the master. But it obviously didn't shake your confidence, because something I learned about your career a number of years ago that has in a way always stuck with me was that you went in and started your own practice really not long after gaining a little bit of experience at another firm.
Yeah. Well, I should explain. Someone else asked me something about that yesterday, and I thought I should put that in context. I think it's not as remarkable as it sounds, actually, because when I was at RMIT, it still was structured, its timetabling and stuff, around the idea of the working man's college. And what that meant was that it was always this combination of industry and an academy or university, if you like, and the way it was set up was that a lot of our classes were at night time, especially things like our design studios, a major part of the course. They were at night because the intention was that people would be working, or expectation people were working during the day, so you studied at night. So it did mean that while you were studying, you were also, apart from working maybe hospo jobs and things like that, which probably paid a lot better than working in an office, you were also getting some experience. So I started working in the practice from about third year onwards, and then I took a little bit of a break and I worked in an office overseas in Italy for a while, and then I came back and continued combining study with practice experience. So by the time I graduated, I actually had quite a lot of different architectural practice experiences under my belt, really different range of practices. And so it wasn't that strange to then think, now that I've seen this various ways of working and practicing, what do I like about those? What am I really not liking about those? And how could you do it differently? And that's when I started to think about a practice, establishing a practice. Yeah. So I had it, it was more than straight out of school, so to speak, because school at the time meant you had quite a lot of experience. It was great. I mean, there's something really compelling about that model, and I feel sad sometimes for students, because I still do quite a lot of teaching in architecture, who are just, because fees, it was also not fee paying, that's the other important thing about the end of the 80s, now students are having very big fees. They've got to work to pay for those as well as their living, and so it's really hard for them to get that experience through their course. So it's much more split, if you like, between industry and your learning about it. Yeah.
And I imagine the culture was also that you would go out and have your own practice one day. It wasn't so much training and preparation to be an employee, to then spend a long time learning and studying and registering. I feel like that the students of today, particularly my students that I'm teaching as a session, will have this very long mindset. And when I was still a student, there was this expectation that you would actually be a very long process and that you shouldn't rush. And it was very provocative to want to go and register as quickly as possible.
Yeah, that's really interesting you say that. I actually don't really have a memory of what was expected in that regard. I do remember saying to another person I was studying with at the time that I could imagine starting a practice. And I remember she looked at me like, oh, but, wouldn't you be worried about this and that and that? And I think perhaps there's a little bit of just obliviousness, actually, to the complexity of it that was probably quite useful. I didn't overthink it. And it just took one decent-sized project that came about for me to think, yep, no, that's it. That's enough to bite the bullet and finish teaching full-time, which I did after I immediately graduated. So I was teaching for 4 years with a little bit of site work and stuff for other architects. And then a project came about and it was in 1994 when I thought, yep, okay, off we go. So that's how it started. But, I often say to people, if you thought every day what could happen, what you could be responsible for, liable for, the tensions you're going to have to resolve,
You'd
the
never
debates
do it.
you're going to have, you would not get out of bed, let alone front up to the office. So honestly, just one step at a time, and you just trust that you'll find your way through the quagmire that can be practiced some days. I mean, it's also marvelous. So yeah,
amazing advice for our listeners, and so worth it if you're ready for that moment, for that step to take your leap. Tell me more about that first project. Was it the Lyceum Club that gave you that first breakthrough moment?
No, that's much later. No, the first project. I mean, I did some work for family earlier on, and that was still while I was teaching. But the first project beyond that, which was really when the practice started, was a really interesting one. It was 3 couples who bought a 3-story warehouse in Fitzroy on Gertrude Street. Gertrude Street was pretty different then. This is in, say, 94. And it was to convert that into 7 apartments. And they were each going to stay or live in one and then either sell off or rent the remainder. And it was a like a shoestring budget. But it was a really wonderful opportunity, and it came about, a few things that was really interesting about that project. First of all, it kind of preempted a lot of the more co-housing type things that are now spoken about as if it's new, but actually, elsewhere, and here there have been examples of groups of people getting together and finding a way to develop something themselves because it's more affordable than not. It's risky too, but when it works, it's a fantastic initiative. So it was a terrific project in that regard, but it came about through, a friend of a friend, and they were looking for architects, and they met a few of us, and for some reason we just clicked. And I think it just was one of those really rare moments when someone holds your sort of, how you are as a person and how well you relate to each other as their decider, rather than how many projects exactly like this have you done. there was trust from the beginning, and I was, at the time really surprised that they were prepared to back someone who didn't have a comparable project in their portfolio. So it was a fabulous leap of faith on their part. And actually, to this day, they became friends. And one of those couples, because they eventually all left the building, but one of them now are my neighbours in the compound where I live. So, yeah, we have a sort of it's a shared courtyard garden with 3 houses around it, and they're one of the people there. So it's it was a fantastic beginning that just worked really, really well. It wasn't easy, but it worked really well. And
what a beautiful beginning story. How fortunate. And I really do come back to this point on the program. Often listeners would know that clients aren't just purchasing a drawing or a product or a house. They're actually buying 2 to 4 years of our life.
Exactly.
It's the relationship. That's
right. And I have learnt over the years that, sometimes I think, could I have dinner with this person and, find it engaging, and it's someone I would love to talk to for, a long time, because you're right, it is. And I mean, certainly with those people, it's definitely, we've had many dinners since that have been fantastic, but it's not always that simple. But I think you're right, it's free speaking and frank conversation, I think, is foundational to what we do. So if you can't speak freely with the person that you're going to be designing with for a while, then
red flag.
Maybe not the right combo. Yeah, it's everything.
I remember from your book launch talk of the beautiful monograph from that evening at the Capitol Theatre. Also, listeners may know that's one of my favourite buildings in Melbourne, in the CBD, by Marion Mahoney and Walter Burley Griffin. It's a fabulous launch evening, and during that talk, you'd said that you'd won the commission for the Jewish Holocaust Museum in Elston here in Melbourne, really on the basis that the client group felt that you would be able to listen to them and listen to their story and listen to their needs.
Yeah, I think I do remember a lot of the conversations leading up to the building as it manifest, and I think it's that thing of listening. I mean, it sounds so obvious that you need to listen, like, honestly, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But I think, listening is one thing, and then what you do with what you're hearing or taking in is the next key thing.
But deep listening is such a core skill of architecture that is rarely trained in architectural education.
True.
Rarely addressed.
Yeah.
And is so critical to the work of a good architect.
I think that's right. And I think, too, what I discovered a long time ago was often people might not say, this is not about the museum, by the way, this is other projects, but I have found that sometimes you've got to read between the lines as well. And what is being said is maybe not what is really being said, or what is really meant, or what needs to be said. So attentive listening and the time, the body language, how people are, just reading people as they're speaking, or the choice of words they might use. Sometimes a word really stands out. I think that's really important to hold on to that, because that's got a clue or a really big key to, or insight for the project. And it's also similarly, sometimes the official brief is not the real brief. So there's a lot of things that briefs tell you, like how many rooms or the size of things, but then there's all these things that they often don't have any words around, and that's what you have to glean through that listening. So
what's unsaid and being a bit of a detective by nature.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it comes back to people again, doesn't it? Which is where we started, and as it should with architecture. But I know with the Holocaust Museum, there were, apart from members of the project group there that I worked very closely with, people like Jane Josem in particular, and actually Alan, I've just had a blank. Alan Finman. So who were just fantastic to work very closely with. But in addition to them, there were, close other friends and people who I would talk with and wrestle with some of the ideas with that project, what was an appropriate way to think about the role of the museum or the architecture within the context of the Holocaust as well. And someone like Kathy Temin who's a very close friend and also a very fine artist. A lot of her work has been around the Holocaust with her family history, and being able to talk with someone like, run thoughts past, and that would then inform the project was very rich. There were so many conversations that led to that project, and I think in many ways I'm grateful it took a long time to get off the ground, in the sense that I think we won the project through competition in about 2014, 13, and then it took a long time with fundraising and so forth to finally be built. But I think that slow gestation just meant there was more time for more conversations, more explorations of how to make this a project for this particular community too. Going back to what we were saying before, there's many Holocaust museums throughout the world, but how would this be one that is about Melbourne's community? So, yeah, it's a lot of deep listening there.
Was it a harder project for you to work on compared to other significant buildings in your portfolio before or since?
Yeah, it was actually. It's a really good question, and I have to say, it did feel like it felt like a big responsibility to develop architecture for that brief, because the fear was, to really know your place as an architect, actually, in the context of engaging with the Holocaust. And having seen a lot of international projects, I was very cautious about buildings that try to represent the horror of it. I just think that's impossible, and it's a kind of conceit, really, that architecture could do that. And so, but on the other hand, it didn't feel right to. You didn't want to be seen to not be confronting either the horror. So it was a sort of fine line to walk. And where we got to in the end was to let the building itself, the architecture, its interiors, to be sort of kind and humane spaces from which people would then be able to engage with very difficult content and difficult stories. So let the survivors speak, let their stories, let their artefacts, let the museum programs be the means by which hard and difficult stories are told. And the building is really there as a kind of comfortable and humane place of reception for those. I have to say I was slightly mortified by other types of buildings where they had tried to imitate it. It's like, how can you do that? How does that not diminish memory? So it took a long time to get to that position. And even then I remember saying to Kathy one day, as we were sort of thinking through the interior palette, and I was thinking, could this be seen as too kind and soft and gentle? Could that be seen as avoiding difficult things? And then we thought, no, that feels right. As I say, there are other ways of engaging. So it's an interesting reflection on the role of architecture. and its relation to trauma, actually, or what we do with that
And
in buildings
trauma
for
informed
that.
design as well.
Exactly. That's right. Exactly. And I remember when it was finished, one of the survivors, because of course the project took a long time, and I think we're all a bit anxious that there would be no survivors remaining by the time the building was finished. And it was so much their project because it had been a dream for so long of theirs. So it was fantastic that several still alive upon completion, and one of whom just said that really, she really appreciated the calmness of the space and felt it sort of brought a comfort or something to her. I can't remember her exact words, but I was, just immensely relieved that that was how it was experienced. And I thought, okay, well, I think that's, yeah, that's a, that's, that I took a lot of comfort myself from that as well. Yeah.
I think not only comfort, one of the really important successes of the interior and some of those programmatic relationships, how the building works, is that it's a living building. It's a living community. It's a living group of survivors and their descendants. In fact, Melbourne and Sydney have the largest group of Holocaust survivors outside of Israel anywhere in the world. And the Jewish culture is an ethno-religion that is a living tradition.
Absolutely.
And continuing and living. And so the glowing light of that building, the life of that building, and coming in for events, for programs, for films, for talks, not simply to engage with the exhibition, but seeing it as a functional community building.
Absolutely.
Is an important success of the project ultimately.
Yeah, no, look, that's very well put. And I think that was another aspect to it, is that it, on the one hand, it was a memorial of sorts, but on the other hand, it was also about education and futures and building collective futures. So you're right, absolutely looking to that as well, and life. And I think, even how we handled the appearance of the building from outside and then within, and the use of light as a way to hold opposites. Like sometimes opposites do coexist, like, brutality and beauty, or lightness and darkness. Yeah. And so it was security, resilience, and openness and transparency. So we were trying to hold all those impossible things together. So that's
it really is a beacon from the streetscape. I pass that building frequently, and just the other week, I think I posted a photo on my Instagram story.
Photo, by the way.
Thank you. Well, I managed to capture the photo, I think probably in the exact same time that your photographer had after completion, or maybe in one of the renders. It felt like almost a CGI moment of the exact color of the sky and the glow of the glass brick.
Gorgeous.
But it shines as quite a beacon on that street, and I think the idea of hope and light and transformation is super important. So I'm curious, did you go on an international study tour before commencing design? You did?
Yeah, I did. I didn't get to America, but I did a lot of, I looked at a lot of museums there, but it was mainly Europe, and that I visited a number of museums there. And I think that's, obviously Liebeskin's Jewish Museum in Berlin, which was just so phenomenal. And on one level, I thought, how can you do more than what he did with the notion of the void? And then, there's things like Washington's museum, which I think was what made me fearful of something more quotational and derivative of spatial qualities of those of camps in particular. So yes, and an enormous amount of reading as well. And so, I remember at one stage I thought, God, if readings is looking at my order list of books, they'll be thinking, it was just very intense few years of backgrounding, and I think all for the reasons that we were talking about before, really wanting to think very carefully. I mean, we think about all of our projects carefully. This one felt particularly, it just required a lot of thought.
I mean, this is a very important insight, I think, for our listeners into just the kind of depth of research and ultimately sometimes heartache that architects go to really meaningfully and passionately engage with content and material and ideas. Certainly I really appreciate how when you're considering museum architecture, particularly when it comes to the architecture of remembrance, you want to create an offering that is more than just, kind of replaying something or a video game experience, for want of a better word. And of course, I think with a very powerful precedent of the great star architect Moshe Safdie's Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, it's very, very hard to beat that example, especially in such a tight site that you're working with there.
It just has to be something else, doesn't it? No, that's right.
And somehow Australian. It somehow came back that bridge.
So, that's right. I think too, I think it was also, all projects just require care. And I think people can feel when something has been cared about in its making and its conceptualizing. And they should be cared for, because it's the building. It's a way of expressing care for people, isn't it? And I think it's also important just to recognise that these things don't happen overnight. The thinking can take a long time, and there is lots of doubt as you're making a project. I think doubt is really helpful, actually, because you keep accounting for your decisions.
The why, the big why that we ask all the students all the time. Why are you doing this?
That's right. And I think as practitioners, you've always got to keep asking why you're doing what you're doing. Is it good enough? Is it doing what you think it needs to be doing? And it's not just a flash of inspiration out of nowhere, or even if you have a momentary flash of, wow, this could be possible. What it takes to deliver on that is so much effort and care. And
what does good design mean to you?
Exactly.
What does good design mean to you?
Sometimes I think it's that there's a kind of ease of fit between actually in anything. If I'm picking up a mouse like I am right now, does it kind of fit my hand? Is it easy? Do I not even have to think about the mouse because it does what it needs to do? And in some ways, I think a building that is well designed is a bit like that. I don't need to think about the building to evidence its good design. It's there, and it's supportive, and
does it respond to the human condition?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's something that I think often buildings are very subliminal in how we feel right in them, and as much as they're put together, as I was describing before, of my readings and musings and rationalizations and tests and hypotheses and all of those things, on another level, they're just entirely sort of visceral experiences through your, smell, sight, hearing, all of that. It's just this all-encompassing thing. And I often think the job of a good architect is to anticipate all of those qualities when you're imagining a space. You're not just, we misuse the word visualize too much, actually, because what I think good practitioners of architecture are doing is they're anticipating this whole spatial experience that's so diverse, all of our senses, and imagining what it will be like to be in that, whether it's yourself, but also to put yourself in the shoes of others, to see if it's the right thing that you're imagining. And I describe that as a kind of spatial empathy, really. So that's for me what good design in buildings is anyway.
We've come
Imagining.
right back
Oh,
full
sorry.
circle to that behavioral psychology element.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? It's yeah, can't escape it. You can see why I almost ended up being a psychiatrist instead. Well, people, they're fascinating. Their motivations and
But
yeah,
beyond just a consult, say you were in a
mm,
clinical setting, that's a consult, that's a session, that's two. Hopefully they are able to recover and they make important, profound differences to people's lives. But architecture has the
yeah,
power to influence whole communities, whole cities, whole neighborhoods,
absolutely,
thousands of people
absolutely.
at once.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why, with for instance, with, a couple of things I would say at the moment with the housing issue that we have at the moment, good design of housing is absolutely essential. And every single house, every single apartment matters if it's well designed. It's how it relates to its neighbours, it's how it relates to its street, and then in turn its suburb, and that's what makes a good city. So yeah, the dwelling is the brick, if you like, in the creation of our cities. It just matters enormously, and everyone should have the right to decent housing as well, which I know we're all wrestling with at the moment,
It's certainly
and
our
have a lot of issues to resolve with that.
biggest frontier issue in the industry right now,
That's
and
right.
across our
Exactly.
general conceptualizing of our nation and our future next steps as a country.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's right. And it is strange because I think listeners would probably be right to think that a lot of what architects do is only for a very small amount of housing and often quite a privileged form of housing. And I think that there is a lot more being done where, especially at the moment, with our increasing need for density and different models of living more closely together now more than ever, how well we design those neighbourhoods is just so critical, and those buildings are the beginning of that. So that's of great interest to me, how we move from how we can, on the one hand, do very bespoke dwellings, they're super tailored to their individual households, and then how we can also make really fine housing for everybody, for people we don't know yet. And it's how we also, as we do that, find ways to, protect existing residents' needs, but also we have a responsibility to the future ones as well. So that's the interesting balancing act, I think, that needs to take place. But as we see the link between a home and people's capacity to have stability enough to be able to function, to be able to hold a job down, to have access um, to jobs and other opportunities. It's just so fundamental. And then on that, just the link to health more broadly, it's becoming more and more um, obvious that the quality of our spaces has real health benefits. I don't think as an industry we've been particularly good at explaining that or substantiating those claims. So I think that's something I'd like to see us do more, not just say this will make you feel better, but how does it do that? And yeah, that's pretty powerful and certainly my experience. Yeah.
Back it up with data, back it up with evidence, right? And
Exactly.
keep architects
That's right.
at the core of those conversations
Yeah, that's right.
and where we're
Exactly.
headed, because that's what we do. You bring together really complex ideas and stakeholder groups and
Yeah.
concerns, and you bring that all together and you find this outcome through the
Mm,
process. So I have hope that we will solve this housing
yeah,
crisis, the kind of the largest question at the
yeah,
moment, but we are living that question, aren't we, as a discipline?
absolutely. And it won't be, architects are just one cog in that wheel. It's a very complex one. But I do think that, one of the great opportunities and or the realities of good architecture is its capacity to synthesize a whole lot of different strands of information. And I often describe us as the great integrators and synthesizers, like, how the engineer, the structural engineer will know about structure, the lighting engineer will know about lighting, but who knows about all of the bits? Who has to know a bit about everything to pull it all together and for it not to end up a complete schmozzle? It's the architect.
Absolutely.
So it's now, and if you just look at the number of consultants on a team now, my God, it's just becoming exponentially bigger and more complex as a task. But that is the thing that in teaching work, so much of what I get students to do is negotiate together outcomes. It's like that is what we do every day. Tensions between different parties, different people's expectations. How do you resolve it? You're going to have to do something. So it's that process of mediation, negotiation. I think architects are incredible at doing that, and we should celebrate what we bring, the calm and the order we bring to mess. It's phenomenal. Yeah, that's without cutting out the life, of course. But yeah.
I wonder, what's the hardest lesson you've had to learn in practice?
I think it's probably a lesson I'm still learning, and I think I imagine a lot of architects would say this. It's just how you make a profession that ideally love, how you make that more able to keep good people in it, because you can remunerate at the levels you need to. So how we keep people in it. So we're finding a model of continuing to do good quality work and finding a way that's financially stable as well. That's very complex, and I think there's real struggles in our industry at the moment around that. So that's one that I'm continuing to learn and trying to solve. But it's complex, that one. Yeah. I'd hate to see us lose more great people to things like project management or other much better paying jobs within the building industry. But that's happening at the moment. You can see that in lots of places. Yeah.
The great brain drain, almost.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely. I mean, but as the great integrators, they are very valuable people to have on teams elsewhere, construction managers, whatever you like. So, yeah. It's an interesting one. How you make the business of the design and the design of the business, I think that's probably our next good project, designing sustainable architectural practices. Yeah.
Which underpins that whole process and the whole net benefit to society and the whole creation of the world. And maybe that's how we need to actually be talking about value in the big picture net benefit, because
definitely, yeah.
We've managed to save the Architects Act in New South Wales just this week, breaking news.
Yeah.
And we need to stay strong as a profession. There's one question I love to ask all my guests to wrap up the conversation on, and that is, what gives you hope?
What gives me hope? What gives me hope is that there's always another, people younger than you often who you might think, oh gosh, they're not doing this, but then they're doing all these other things and they're looking at the world in quite different ways. And I think rather than resisting how it's different to, say, my generation's way of thinking, to think, there's something in that we can build on, and the kind of excitement to find new ways forward. I definitely think that. And that's just by staying attuned and open to the people around you, and just changing how you think, where wisdom comes from. Yeah, that gives me a lot of hope. Yeah,
I love that. Thank you so much for joining me on the program, Kerstin.
Thank you, Ilana. It was a pleasure chatting. And you're right, the hour goes very fast.
Thanks for joining me for another evening of Radio Architecture with Ilana Razbash. This live show was broadcast and recorded in the Radio Karim studio on Bunurong Country. You can replay the show wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for tuning in and supporting community radio. Take care.
Hey, it's Jada from Teen Choosers and the Gene Choosers, and you're listening to Radio Karam.
Hey, ST.
Yes,
If
mate.
you had a business, who would you use for your systems integration?
Look, I was thinking about this earlier on in the week, and I'd done a fair bit of homework on it, but the name that kept coming up was DB Results.
And GS, if you needed someone to improve your digital business transformation, who would you use?
Oh, without a doubt, I'd go straight to DB Results.
AC, digital solutions, you've got to improve it in your business. Who'd you go to?
Got to be DB Results, AA.
I tell you, DB Results are the right digital solutions for your business.
When the going gets tough.
Going gets tough.
When the going gets tough.
DB Results.
When the going gets tough.